This ends now.
Not if I have a say.
The ranch near Tucson was sprawling and successful, built on water rights and cattle, and the kind of influence that came from being well connected to the territorial government. Thomas Whitfield had inherited it from his father, along with all the moral contradictions that came with wealth built on exploitation. He was 38 years old and had never questioned the system he benefited from, until the day everything changed. It happened on a Tuesday morning in early spring, 1882. Thomas had been in town conducting business with the territorial commissioner, discussing water rights and cattle prices, and the usual matters that occupied the minds of men with power. As he was leaving the commissioner's office, he was pulled aside by a man named Harrison, a cavalry officer with a kind of rigid smile that suggested he'd practiced it in a mirror. "Got a gift for you, Whitfield," Harrison said. "Consider it payment for your recent donation to the military fund." Thomas hadn't made any donation to the military fund, but he was learning that powerful men often made donations on behalf of other powerful men without asking permission. Before he could respond, Harrison led him to the back of the government building, where two women were being held in a makeshift pen. They were Apache. That much was obvious from their clothing and bearing. The older one was maybe 30, with a face that had been carved by suffering into something almost beautiful in its hardness. The younger one couldn't have been more than 18, with eyes that still held fear instead of resignation. "Sisters," Harrison explained, "captured during a raid 2 weeks ago. The band they were traveling with escaped, but these two were separated. We don't have resources to keep them indefinitely, and they won't tell us anything useful. So I thought you might find a use for them. They're strong. They can work. They'll need watching. Apache are cunning, but they're good stock." Thomas felt something in his chest tighten. "What do you mean, give them to me?" "I mean they're yours. Do whatever you want with them. Put them to work. Sell them. Doesn't matter to me. Just keep them out of the territory. We can't have Apache wandering around causing problems." The way the officer said it, like Thomas was accepting a pair of horses instead of two human beings, made his stomach turn. And yet, he understood that refusing would make him appear weak, would raise questions, would mark him as someone not sufficiently committed to the proper order of things. "I'll take them," Thomas heard himself say. The sisters arrived at his ranch late that afternoon, bound with chains, accompanied by a soldier who helped secure them in the storage building. Thomas watched the process with a sense of unreality, as if someone else's hands were signing the papers, as if someone else's voice was accepting delivery of human beings like they were goods on invoice. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, drinking whiskey that tasted like ash, thinking about the women in his storage building. Their names, he'd learned, were Wakanda and Isana. Wakanda was the older sister. Isana was the younger. They spoke to each other in Apache, refusing to engage with Thomas or any of his employees. They looked at him with a hatred so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air between them. By morning, Thomas had made a decision that he knew would alter the trajectory of his life. He brought the sisters into the main house and told them to sit. Wakanda tense, clearly expecting violence or worse. Isana looked resigned, as if she'd already accepted whatever came next. "My name is Thomas Whitfield," he said carefully, speaking slowly so they could follow his English. "I don't want you as slaves. I don't want you to work for me. I want to help you escape." Wakanda's face contorted. "Lies. You are soldier. All white men are soldiers." "I'm not a soldier," Thomas said. "Not anymore. And I'm not going to keep you here. I'm going to give you money, supplies, horses, and directions to the Mexican border. You're going to ride south, and you're going to disappear. No one will know you left. No one will follow." Isana looked at her sister with confusion. "Why? What does he want?" It was a good question. Thomas sat down, trying to find words that would explain something he was only beginning to understand about himself. "Because what happened to you is wrong," he said finally. "Because I've spent my whole life benefiting from a system that treats your people like they're less than human. Because I'm tired of that. And because I can't change the system from inside, but I can change this. I can change what happens to you." "It could be a trap," Wakanda said, looking at her sister. "It could be," Thomas acknowledged. But what's your alternative? Stay here? Work as slaves? Hope that you eventually escape on your own? My way, you leave today. You have supplies and horses, and a chance. That's all I'm offering, a chance. He laid out the plan carefully. He had a friend in Mexico, a man named Raphael, who ran a station on the underground network that helped Apache escape to the mountains where they could rejoin their people. Raphael owed Thomas a favor from years ago. All Thomas had to do was get the sisters to Raphael's place, a 2-day ride south. I'll take you myself, Thomas said, as far as Raphael's. After that, you're on your own. Wakanda and Isana exchanged a long look. Some conversation happened between them, without words, the kind of communication that comes from sharing blood and history and trauma. If this is a trick, Wakanda said slowly, I will kill you. I know how. I have killed soldiers before. I believe you, Thomas said, and I'm telling you it's not a trick. They left that evening, Thomas and the 2 Apache sisters, riding south toward the border with a pack of supplies and enough money to start over. Thomas had left a letter for his ranch foreman, explaining that he'd gone to Mexico on business and would be gone for several weeks. The letter was carefully vague about everything. The first night, they camped in a canyon that Wakanda knew, a place that was hidden from the main roads. Thomas built a fire while the sisters prepared food from the supplies he'd brought. They didn't trust him, but they were beginning to accept that immediate escape was no longer their priority. Why did you really do this? Isana asked. She was younger, with less hardened edges, more willing to believe that kindness might be possible. Thomas thought about how to explain the crisis of conscience that had gripped him, the moment he realized that his comfort was built on the suffering of others. I have a daughter, he said finally. She's 12. I've been thinking about what kind of world I'm leaving her. What kind of legacy? I'm leaving her a ranch built on stolen land, maintained by stolen people. That's not the man I want to be. That's not the world I want her to inherit. You should go back, Wakanda said harshly. You should use your position to change things. I will, Thomas said. But first, I'm getting you safe. The next day, as they rode through increasingly rough terrain, Isana began to open up. She told him about her life before the raid, about her family, about the dreams she'd had before everything was taken from her. Wakanda remained suspicious. But Thomas noticed her listening, noticed the small ways she began to relax her vigilance. On the second night, they reached Raphael's compound, a well-hidden ranch in the foothills of northern Mexico. Raphael embraced Thomas like a brother, then turned to Wakanda and Isana with the kind of respect usually reserved for warriors. You're safe now, Raphael said to them in Spanish, which they understood. We have connections with bands in the mountains. We can get you to your people within 2 weeks. You'll be home. Wakanda looked at Thomas with an expression he couldn't quite read. You did this. You actually did this. I did, Thomas said. Why? It was Isana, asking the question that seemed to hold all the others within it. Because you deserve a life, Thomas said. Because captivity is a crime, and I couldn't participate in it anymore. Because I'm trying to become someone better than I was. Wakanda approached him slowly, and for a moment, Thomas thought she might kill him after all. Instead, she took his hand and pressed it to her heart. Thank you, she said in English, the words careful and precise. You are different, but I don't know if different is enough. The world that enslaved us, it needs to change. One man's conscience is not enough. No, Thomas agreed. It's not, but it's a start. He returned to his ranch 3 weeks later, changed in ways that were immediately obvious to everyone who knew him. He began freeing the workers who'd been bound to property through various forms of coercion and exploitation. He used his influence to challenge unfair laws regarding Native Americans and Mexican citizens. He became the kind of man that other wealthy men quietly despised, principled, difficult, uncompromising in his commitment to justice. His friends abandoned him. The territorial commissioner called his actions treacherous. But Thomas had discovered something more valuable than friendship or approval. He discovered integrity. 10 years later, in 1892, Thomas received a visitor. It was Wakanda, older now, wearing traditional Apache clothing but riding a well-bred horse and carrying herself with the authority of someone of status. She wasn't alone. With her was a young woman of maybe 10, with Wakanda's dark eyes and Thomas's blood running through her veins. "This is my daughter," Wakanda said. "Isana's child, raised by our people. Her father was a warrior of my tribe, a good man, strong and kind like you. I wanted you to meet her. I wanted her to know the man who gave her mother a chance." Thomas stood stunned. "You and Isana found each other? You're alive? You're well." "We're more than well," Wakanda said. She smiled, the first real smile he'd ever seen from her. "We're free. And because we're free, we could choose to marry warriors we loved. We could have children. We could build lives. This girl," she gestured to the child, "she's the grandchild of someone who was enslaved. And instead of growing up in captivity, she's growing up in mountains, in freedom, learning our songs and our stories. That's what you gave us, Thomas. Not just escape, the possibility of real life." The girl approached Thomas shyly and offered him something, a woven band, beautifully made. "My mother said you were the first white man to see us as people," she said in careful English. "I wanted to give you something to remember that we remember you." Thomas took the woven band and felt tears on his face. He'd spent a decade wondering if his action had mattered, if one man's decision to free 2 women was enough to balance against all the injustices he couldn't fix. "What's her name?" he asked Wakanda. "Liberty," Wakanda said. "We call her Liberty, because that's what she is. That's what you gave her before she was even born." They stayed for a week, and Thomas showed Liberty around the ranch, told her stories about her mother and her aunt, explained how change happened, not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice. When they left to return to the mountains, Wakanda embraced him in front of all the ranch hands, a public acknowledgement of gratitude that would have been scandalous a decade earlier. Thomas never married. He never had children of his own, but he became known throughout the territory as a man of principle, and his ranch became a sanctuary for people fleeing unjust circumstances. When he died in 1905, at the age of 61, the obituary in the Tucson paper carefully avoided mentioning why he'd become so controversial. But the Apache people who came to his funeral, more than anyone expected, knew exactly who Thomas Whitfield was. He was a man who'd been given 2 women as slaves and had chosen to free them instead. He was a man who understood that one person's conscience, multiplied by another person's freedom, could create ripples that lasted generations. He was a man who proved that it's never too late to choose what's right, even when what's right costs you everything the world had promised you. Years later, when Liberty was old and had children and grandchildren of her own, she would tell them the story of the white rancher who'd freed her mother and her aunt. She'd show them the woven band they'd given him, which had been returned to her after his death. And she'd tell them the most important part, that resistance and rebellion, and the choice to treat human beings like human beings. That was how change happened. One moment at a time. One courageous choice at a time. The story of Thomas Whitfield and the 2 Apache sisters he was given as slaves became legend in both worlds. In the world of the Apache people who'd honored him as a liberator, and in the world of the wealthy ranchers who condemned him as a traitor. But the truth was simpler than either version. He was just a man who decided that his comfort wasn't worth the cost of someone else's freedom. And in that decision, he'd changed not just 2 lives, but the trajectory of his entire world.